Hey guys, YouTube100 here, starting my Christmas reviews this year with a review of the Santa Claus. Yeah, I tried reviewing this just a little bit earlier on, but it's taking forever for it to process, so I just decided just to screw that review and I'm just gonna do it all over again. So yeah, this was a really good movie right here. The first two Santa Claus movies are, I'd say, Disney's best Christmas movies. And yeah, they're just really entertaining, and I think they're really good movies. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that pretty much just sums it up. They're really good movies to watch, and yeah, so I really did like this. Yeah, I thought this was a really entertaining. I give this 3.25 stars out of 4. So yeah, I thought the plot for this was pretty much, yeah, that's what the first movie usually is, just an introduction and how a guy just he starts whatever, like a superhero movie. Yeah, just here he becomes a guy becomes Santa. So yeah, let me just get right into the review. Alright, so the movie starts with Scott Calvin, who's played by Tim Allen. He's like having a Christmas party at work. It's Christmas Eve, and he's like thanking everyone for coming, and yeah, just that kind of stuff. And as he's driving home, his ex-wife Laura calls him, and he says that he's stuck in traffic when he's not. It's just a clear road, and he's just like yelling out to people who aren't even there, making it seem like he really is stuck in traffic. Yeah. And then he finally gets home where Laura and her new husband Neil and son Charlie are waiting for him. And as Laura takes Charlie in, she tells Scott that her and Neil are going to spend Christmas with Neil's family, and Scott says Christmas at the pound. And she told out about Charlie coming home in tears one day because of someone telling him Santa's not real. And Charlie told Scott that Neil doesn't believe in Santa. Scott told Charlie that he does. And as Laura was leaving, she told Charlie that she'd pick him up first thing tomorrow morning. And then we saw what looked to be Scott and Charlie's dinner, but it was just on TV. Yeah, and then there was a turkey burning in Scott's oven, and he was extinguishing it. And then some of the fire extinguisher stuff got on the turkey. So Scott and Charlie went out to eat, and Scott was no, sorry, Charlie was telling Scott that some stuff, and he was using some pretty advanced words, and he said that he learned them from Neil, and he learned a lot from Neil because Neil listens to him. And then they ate at Denny's, and like there was a bunch of Japanese people there just giving a bunch of orders, and the waitress was going all over the place. And then back at home, Scott was reading The Night Before Christmas to Charlie, and then looked like Charlie was asleep. And then Scott just like rushed through the story, and then Charlie misunderstood the arose such a clatter line. He asked what it was, and he thought he said a rose such a clatter. And then he was asking Scott some questions like how do reindeer fly and how are they able to pull Santa and some other questions. Then later that night, Scott and Charlie heard a clatter on the roof. Scott went to check it out, and it was Santa. Then Santa slid down the roof and down to the ground. And then Scott was looking for some identification on him. And then Scott saw that there was a card and said if anything happens to him to put on the suit and the reindeer would know what to do. And then Scott and Charlie saw the reindeer on the roof. And then Santa disappeared, but the suit was still there. And Scott was like, he's naked somewhere. Yeah, and Scott was trying to figure out what was going on. And then a ladder appeared and hit Scott in the head. And it said the Rose Citric Ladder Company on it. And then Scott took the suit up to the roof. And then Charlie was in the sled. Scott was trying to get him out, and he said, let's go. And then the reindeer took off. Yeah, and then they were on a rooftop, and then Charlie told Scott that he needs to put on the suit and go down the chimney. Scott didn't want to do it because it was stupid. And Charlie got depressed. He asked why is everything he wants to do stupid. And then Scott then put on the suit and then went down the chimney. And when he left the gifts, there was a dog there that was starting to bark at him, and as Scott tried to get it out through the window, the alarm went off. And then Scott then went back up the chimney, and then he told Charlie it felt like America's Most Wanted. Then they went to another house, but the bag was empty, and Scott said that he couldn't do any more. Then Comet, who was the reindeer, growled at him. Scott was trying to show Comet that there was nothing left in the bag, and then more stuff then was in the bag. But they were on a roof where there was no chimney, so you know how on some rooftops they have like those small pipes on top of the roof? Yeah, Scott went through one of those. And then a fireplace just appeared. And there was a girl sleeping on the couch, and she woke up and she was asking Scott why his clothes were so baggy and why he doesn't have a beard. And then Scott just took a piece of celery instead of the cookies and milk. And the girl told him that he's supposed to drink the milk, and Scott just said he's lactose intolerant. And when he went back up, everything just was like back to normal. Then in another house, Scott had a kayak. Actually, and he set it up against the wall next to the tree, and then it just tipped over and knocked the tree down. And then once Scott finished, they went back to the North Pole, where an elf then appeared, and there was a pole with like some kind of keypad on it. And then the elf lowered Scott and Charlie into the workshop, whatever. And all the elves were there. Scott was asking just an elf what was going on. And then they started arguing, and then the head elf Bernard then broke it up, and he was telling Scott that now he's Santa. And then Charlie appeared, and Bernard gave Charlie a kind of like a magical snow globe. And Bernard was then telling Scott that he's Santa because yeah, he read the card hard and he put on the suit, so yeah, he was now Santa. And he was showing Scott like some rectangular words on the card. It was basically saying that he was Santa now, and that he would be sent home in the morning, and he's due back to the North Pole on Thanksgiving, and that he'd send a list to his house. And Scott just asks Bernard what if he doesn't want to do this and he chooses not to believe this. And then there was absolute silence. Then Bernard just told Scott that there would be millions of disappointed children in the world, and that they hold the spirit of Christmas in their hearts, and he asked Scott if he wouldn't want to be responsible for killing the spirit of Christmas, would he? And then another elf, Judy, took Scott to Santa's room, gave him some pajamas, which were like red with SC on the shirt pocket. And it was funny, there were some puppets in the room, and when Scott took the pants off, they were screaming. And then Judy brought Scott a cup of cocoa. And yeah, Scott was just telling Judy that he's just stressed out because he doesn't know whether or not to believe this because he stopped believing Santa a long time ago. And Judy told Scott that a lot of adults really don't believe, and believing is seeing. Yeah. And Scott went to bed, and then the next morning he was back at home, and he was still wearing those pajamas. Yeah, and he looked outside to see if the suit and reindeer were still there, and they weren't. And then Laura and Neil came to pick up Charlie, and Charlie was telling them what happened at the North Pole. And then we saw Charlie at school. It was kind of like parents coming to talk about their jobs, and Scott was there, and Charlie was telling them, his class, what happened. Then Scott, Laura, and Neil went to talk to like a counselor or something. The counselor told Scott that he needs to explain to Charlie that it wasn't real. And Charlie was just still believing that it was real. Oh yeah. And then one day, Laura saw Charlie in his room, kind of like pretending he's Santa, like driving a sleigh. He was like having a bunch of chairs as reindeer, and the Chip and Dale version of Santa Claus is Coming to Town was playing. Yeah. And Neil was then asking Charlie questions like, how is he able to visit all the children in the world in one night, and how is he able to visit people with no fireplaces and stuff? And Charlie was just answering them, saying not everyone celebrates Christmas, and the fireplace would just appear. Yeah. Then Scott was taking Charlie for a walk. He wanted to say that there was no such thing as Santa, but he just couldn't say that, so he just said not there's no reason people should have to hear about the North Pole. So he was just basically asking Charlie to stop talking about it. And then one morning, Scott woke up and he looked in the mirror. He saw he had a starting to grow a beard, and he was gaining some weight. And then he was like went to work, and he was wearing just sweats. He told his co-workers like that all his clothes were burned in a chemical fire, and he was gaining weight because of a bee sting. And they were ordering lunch, and Scott basically just ordered a bunch of sweets. And there was like a presentation. Scott kept butting in and just making a bunch of corrections. Then he was just told to get some help. Then he was in the doctor's office. At this point, Scott had his gut sticking out of his shirt, and his hair had turned gray, and his beard was getting longer. And the doctor was telling Scott that he just couldn't find anything wrong with him. Yeah, and Scott told the doctor that just in a matter of 1 week he gained 45 pounds. The doctor just thought it could have been from all of the sweets he was eating. Scott was asking why was he growing his beard back so fast and why his hair was turning gray. The doctor just said it could be from hormones and it's just middle-aged. Then when he was listening to Scott's heartbeat, it was just beating the Jingle Bells tune. Then, like, during one of Charlie's soccer games, Scott was on a bench and a bunch of kids came up to him telling him what they want for Christmas because they thought he was Santa. And then Laura and Neil came, and they just thought that Scott was doing all this on purpose. Yeah, yeah, just with the gray hair and beard and gaining weight. Yeah, they just thought he was just doing this on purpose to get Charlie to really believe. And then the naughty nice list then was delivered to Scott's house. It, there were just boxes and boxes of it, yeah. It basically just filled up all the downstairs portion of Scott's house. Then Laura and Neil decided that to file for taking Scott's visitation rights away. And then at this point, he his hair was all white. And then at one point he was shaving. He had his hair just normal, and he shaved the beard off. And then it just like grew back right away. And then at that point, Scott just knew he was in trouble. And then over at the court, where Laura was starting to have second thoughts about doing this, and Neil was just telling Laura that something's got to be done about it. And then both were saying why they stopped believing in Santa. It's because they didn't get the gifts they wanted. Laura wanted like a mystery date game, and she didn't get it. And Neil wanted an Oscar Mayer weenie whistle that he didn't get. Yeah. And then when Scott then arrived, the judge told Scott that he's granting Neil and Laura's petition, and as Neil, Laura, and Charlie were leaving, you could actually hear Charlie sobbing. And the judge was telling Scott that all his visitation rights are suspended and there will be a hearing on the first of the year. After the first of the year, I should say, yeah. And when it was Thanksgiving, Scott was walking past their house, and then he went in, and at this point, Charlie was just fighting to defend that Scott was Santa. Then he tossed Scott the snow globe, and it took that for Scott to believe that he was Santa. And he asked if him and Charlie could just be alone so he could say bye properly. And Charlie wanted to go to the North Pole with Scott. Scott told Charlie that he thought it would be a better idea if he just stayed home. Then Bernard appeared. He said he was okay with Charlie going to the North Pole. And then Laura then came back, and Charlie and Scott were gone. And then Laura and Neil summoned the police. Then at the North Pole, the elves and Bernard were giving Scott some advice, like they were showing him his sleigh and his fireproof suit or something. Yeah. And Charlie then called home from the North Pole. The police were trying to trace the call, but the call didn't last long enough to be traced. Yeah, and Scott and Charlie then took off on the sled to deliver the present. At this point, Scott had grown the full Santa beard. Yeah. And they went back to that house that didn't have the chimney that I talked about earlier. And yeah, Scott drank the milk, and it was just soy milk, so it was sour to him. Then he was at Neil, Laura, and Charlie's house. Then the police caught him, and then they arrested him. But Charlie was still on the rooftop. No one knew where he was. And then the elves then summoned the rescuing group of elves or something called ELFS, which stood for Effective Liberating Flight Squad. And then Scott was being questioned, but he didn't want to cooperate, so they decided to just lock him up for a couple hours. Then ELFS came to get Charlie so they could break Scott out. The police officer at the front desk then told them that visiting hours were over, and then he recognized Charlie, and then ELFS tied him up with bows or something. Yeah, yeah, or ribbons I should say. Yeah, something. Yeah. And then they busted Scott out of his cell by breaking the bars off with tinsel. Then Scott took Charlie home. Charlie still wanted to go with Scott, but Scott just told Charlie that he should stay home. And yeah, he was just telling Charlie that it was because of him that he became Santa in the first place. And then Laura finally realized that Scott really was Santa. And then Neil was just speechless. Yeah. Then then before Scott left, she burnt the custody papers given by the court. And then Bernard then appeared again. He told Charlie that anytime he wants to see Scott, he just needs to shake the snow globe, and Scott could come back anytime, day or night. And then the police then came back. They went to the house, tried to take Scott again, but at that point Scott was already on the roof in his sleigh, and went off. And then Neil apologized to Charlie for telling him all that stuff. Yeah. Then Scott dropped down some presents to Charlie, Neil, and Laura. Gave Charlie a soccer ball. Laura got her mystery date game, and Neil got his weenie whistle. Then the movie ended with Charlie trying to do what Bernard told him, to shake the snow globe. It was only 10 minutes after what just happened. Yeah. Yeah, and then Scott then appeared. Charlie went to hug him, and then Scott took Charlie for a sleigh ride. Yeah, and that's how the movie ended. So, yeah, 3.25 stars out of 4. Really enjoyable movie. Alright, so that's it for my review of Santa Claus. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys later.